Thank you very much, Mr Chair. So, in rising to speak to Part 2 of this bill, the Land Transport and Road User Charges Legislation Amendment Bill, Part 2 are the changes that amend the Road User Charges Act. And I just want to identify a few of the elements that are in Part 2. There is provision in Part 2 around the situation of where people are required to have a distance licence. Part of their road user licences in the situation where the vehicle concerned is used outside the terms of its road user licence, user charge licence, and the question around what defence there is in that situation. And the Select Committee, in dealing with this, have suggested an amendment here that is in Part 2, and this is around ensuring that the reasonable excuse is to give guidance to operators and enforcement authorities as to the particular circumstance that might constitute a reasonable excuse without otherwise altering the effect of the provision. So that has been done in this Part 2. Where it sets out that what happens in the situation where the correct, if the vehicle does not have the correct licence for the type of road user charge vehicle that it is. So that's one of the elements in Part 2. Also in Part 2 is the provisions around an offence provision relating to breach of conditions associated with Section 40 of the Road User Charge Act. So that is in the situation of light ruck vehicles that are operated almost exclusively off-road. And that provision is outlined. It adds an offence provision to support the enforcement of conditions associated with exemptions granted under Section 40. The proposed penalties have been set out to be commensurate with penalties associated with other offences of similar seriousness. Now, there are a number of minor technical amendments that are covered off in Part 2 as well, and one of the provisions is to clarify one part, Section 57(1)A, by putting after the word road the word user. So this is a clarification to try and tidy up. Now, again, as I commented in Part 1, Labor does support this bill. It is fixing up some matters that do need to be fixed up. It did have a rather tortuous history to get us here, but the real question, and it's one that both Darian Fenton and Julianne Genter have both raised here, is how all of this relates to any coherent strategic direction for transport in this country. And the fact of the matter is that this is an area where the government is taking a very piecemeal approach. And I thought it was a very interesting suggestion that Darian Fenton made, actually, in her contribution on Part 2, because in fact we do have the Transport and Industrial Relations Select Committee. And so what a fine opportunity, in fact, for that Select Committee particularly to deal with questions of logging trucks and the types of roads that they unfortunately have to use, causing serious accidents and being part of the horrendous health and safety problems we have in that industry. So there's a question of the types of roads and transport used, and the failure, in fact, to make greater use of rail for those, for us to use rail more effectively, especially along the main trunk, and to look at that in conjunction with the conditions of work of people working in the forestry industry. And I think that's an exceptionally good idea, and I think it's one that the Select Committee should take up. And of course the chair of the Select Committee happens to be in the House, and I'm sure that Mr Bennett will want to jump up and agree with this on this matter, agree with us on this very good suggestion made by Darian Fenton, which is a serious suggestion. It's not a joke. This is a real problem we have, and it's a problem in this industry that could be serving this country a great deal more. We could be doing a whole lot better with the forestry industry and with products from the forestry industry. We could be creating better jobs, safer jobs, jobs that pay people a decent standard of living, and creating added value in our economy, Mr Chair.
I call the honourable member Carol.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. As I was saying, that this is an opportunity to look at an industry that is very important for this country, to make sure that not only is it providing decent and safe work for the people who work in it, but also ensuring that we can use forestry and the products from it, wood products from it, to ensure that we have better jobs throughout our economy, that we add value to logs, and we end up with products that we can get far higher prices for. And Labor has outlined a strategy for the wood industry, a strategy that sees us moving from the situation where we currently cut down trees, create logs, put them on trucks, sometimes on trains, take them and export them offshore as logs. Now, what does that add? As Ms Fenton has outlined, we have an industry that's very, very dangerous, including for the truck drivers that drive those trucks on those forestry roads, where we need to invest more in those roads to get logs off safely, and to use our road user charges and our other funding of land transport to do that, rather than on some of the roads of national significance funding. But also, we need to look at getting those logs and doing things with them. And this is the sort of strategic approach that we need in this country to create better jobs, to create greater wealth for this country, so that we can ensure that that wealth is then distributed fairly. All of these things are completely beyond the scope of understanding of members opposite. Strategic decision making is clearly not something that the government is willing to do. Piecemeal approaches, generally hands-off approaches, are what they do best. They are not focused on issues like creating decent work for New Zealanders. They're not focused on a strategic approach to transport that makes sure that the transport system serves the people of this country and the businesses and the jobs that they create. And this is something that's completely foreign to members opposite. I would note in discussing this bill, we have yet to have a contribution from members of the government. It would be very good for them to get up and talk about this bill. I'd really urge David Bennett, the chair of our select committee, to get up and talk about the very good suggestion that's been put on the table today by Darian Fenton about us looking in a collaborative manner in our select committee on issues related to both transport and employment in the forestry sector. Thank you.
The question is that part 2 stand part. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that clauses 1 and 2 stand part. The question is that clause 1 stand part. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that clause 2 stand part. All those in favour please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. You got the chart, sorry.
Mr Chair, I move SOP number 428, dividing the bill.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I will report this bill without amendment and so divided presently. Honourable members, we now come to the Industry Training and Apprenticeships Amendment Bill. The schedule of the proposed questions are, members, we now move to the Industry Training and Apprenticeships Amendments Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. It is a debate on clauses 4 through to 23 and includes schedules 1 and 2. Question is that Part 1 stand part. I call the Honourable Member Megan Woods.
Mr. Chair.